sharing
but
it
I'm
with.
also sharing. Okay.
Okay, give it everybody a little bit of time. Hi there. Hi there. I see one of you guys on, so we're going to give everybody a little bit of time. This is kind of a special treat today. I normally don't even come on Friday afternoons, but I wanted to have a discussion that is going to be fruitful and helpful, especially for leaders. And so if you are on, go ahead and share this with your friends and with your followers. And we're excited to just get into a discussion that I think is so important, that we really don't have the space to talk about. So if you're in ministry, if you're going to be in ministry, if you're in church leadership, this is for you. And we would love to just talk about protecting what we're building. You know, the Lord doesn't put things in our hands for us to build, and we don't have an understanding of it. But I think we get so excited about the spiritual stuff that sometimes we don't think about all the other things that comes up. So I have a special guest. I'm going to give it a little bit more time. Want to get to at least 40 of y'all, and then we're going to start our discussion together today. All right. So let me know where you're logging in from. I see Trinidad there. Thank you for being on. Greetings. April, greetings. Is it Montea? Good to have you on. We look forward to the wonderful discussion. So, Pearl, you are in Trinidad, right? I believe that's that flag there, making sure that I got it right. Dallas, Detroit, Michigan. Good. We're almost at 40. Then I'm going to introduce my special guest for today. And I know people are going to be jumping on as we are discussing and as we are talking. Excellent. Lancaster, South Carolina. Good afternoon. Florida, Chicago. Awesome, awesome, awesome. We're almost there. We were at 31. Come on, keep pushing. We're almost there. Because this is so important. Erika just finished a conference yesterday for ministers, church leaders, and she's going to be sharing some of our nuggets, and she's also going to be talking to me just around my thoughts around building and around leadership and around planting churches and building churches. And so we want to have this conversation together. Good afternoon, Sharon. Good afternoon, Beatrice. Someone said VA is for lovers. We're so glad that you are on from Virginia. I lived there for quite a bit. All right, we're at 42. Let me do my introduction here. Erika Cole uses her almost 25 years of experience providing legal services to denominations and churches to administer her proprietary, she's a smart chick, legal risk management tool, the church attorney legal audit system. And so this is one of the first lawyers that I ever met that was focused on making sure that spiritual leaders not only build something that glorifies God, but something that is ethical and understands all the legal parameters around what they're building. And so even if you're not pastoring a church, even if you're not leading a ministry, I would love for you to just stay on and just kind of hear what we're going to talk about, because it is so vital. And if you serve, you can get some information to pass on to your leaders. So please get out your notebooks and your pens, take some really good notes as we talk. So without further ado, you can do a better job of just introducing yourself a little bit more, but she is my sister, and I'm so excited to have her on with us today.
So thank you so much for having me, Dr. Faith. I so appreciate the work that you do. I appreciate your ministry. I appreciate your heart. Again, my name is Erika Cole. I'm known as the church attorney, and I have spent my entire legal career focused on serving churches and faith-based organizations. It's interesting because I knew as a kid, like, 8, 9, 10 years old, I wanted to be a lawyer.
Wow.
But and I grew up in the church, so I'm thankful for that. My mom was literally my Sunday school teacher. My dad was like the head trustee at our church. But it wasn't until I graduated from law school and I was selected among my entire graduating class to work with the chief judge of our highest court. And
Mm,
a case came in front of the court between a national denomination and a local church. And I was like,
mm.
wait a minute, churches go to court?
Yeah,
So that was my first experience. And God just really used that experience to draw my heart.
yeah,
And I knew that I wanted to be an attorney, but he
yeah.
knew that I was meant to be the church attorney. So,
I love that. So I know you're gonna have some questions for me, but I already have some for you. In
okay.
your years of experience, what three areas do you feel like churches are either most negligent or they're not
Mm.
aware of that they need to really have some sort of legal understanding or legal aspect to their development?
That's a great question. So the top three. So I would say, first of all, the first is going to be a bit more all comprehensive, and
Yeah.
that is churches don't recognize that they live in a legal ecosystem. Like
Mm,
it's the fact that they can focus on the faith and, like you said, the spiritual part. And frankly, that is fun, right?
yeah.
We love to have a guest preacher. We love to have a singer and artist. Like, we love all that part,
Yeah.
but I call it the back office stuff. The
Yeah.
back office stuff will come up to bite you if it is not in order. And so
Yeah.
that's the first thing I always want churches to recognize, that even when it comes to inviting an artist, there's a way to do that, right? You want to make sure that you send them a formal invitation. We talk about an honorarium, but you want to make
Yeah.
sure that there's a W-9. And sometimes you got to actually do a 1099 at the end.
Yeah.
Like, all of these things don't exist in a vacuum. Like, you want to do it legally. So first
Right.
is just recognizing that the church is in a legal ecosystem, from its
Yeah.
creation, the tax exempt status, making sure you have your articles of incorporation,
Yeah.
forming a board, all of
Yep.
that's legal. The second part that I find that can really come up to grab people is, like, as they're expanding,
Yeah.
the things that you might be able to get away with when you're first starting, just when you have a heft of people, when you have growth, you just can't get away with it anymore.
Yeah.
And so, like, that may mean having a board that really is well trained, a
Yeah.
board that understands the finances, making sure that you have those financial things in order. And the third thing I would say is succession planning.
Mm,
I
mm.
just got off a call with a really amazing leader that is in a great position because he knows that he's ready to retire. He's
Yeah.
identified a successor who's excited. The successor was on the call with his spouse, and
Yeah.
they were really excited about it. But the big thing is, he said, I want to create something today that can still live tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that is really where the law helps you.
Yeah.
Contracts, all that stuff matters. So those, I would say, are my top three.
Yeah. So you know how like psychology and the church, for so long was like these two different worlds. I feel like it's the same thing with
Mm,
law, right? Like I don't know if people in the church world can understand how the spiritual stuff cannot really happen unless some legal things are in place. Do you feel like you've seen that sometimes people look at putting together things legally and ethically as like not as spiritual.
Well, for sure. I think about when I first started practicing, people would say, like, why would a church need a lawyer?
Yeah.
Like, now I don't get that question so much because, unfortunately, so much stuff has happened and we see these things play out, usually not in a fantastic way in the media. But I do still think there's so much learning
Yeah.
to happen. And honestly, there's so few attorneys who do what I do.
Yeah.
Like, I know the handful of us across the nation. Like,
Yeah.
we know each other, and they're just not a lot of us. So that's something that I recognize, and I hope and pray that we can serve in a way and we can reach more churches, because we know that the need is high. We
Yeah.
know statistically that 98% of churches don't have an attorney, and
Yeah.
those who do have an attorney don't have an attorney that's focused on church law. So that's
Yeah.
very impactful.
I love that. That's so good. I
Yeah.
love it so much. Yeah. So we've been learning quite a bit. You guys just came out of a conference yesterday. What were
Yes.
some of the highlights, some of the things that you were teaching leaders that are so vital?
So it's interesting. The conference, this is our 17th annual event, which is incredible. I actually created this back in 2008. I
Mhm.
always say that it's information with inspiration.
Yeah.
And when we get feedback from people, that seems to be what they experience as well. So our theme was stewarding your church,
Yeah.
legal and operational insights for a rapidly changing world.
Yeah.
That was the theme that we worked from, because we know that as people of faith, we know that we're stewards. We don't own the church.
Yeah.
It's not our it's the bride of Christ, the
Yeah.
church ultimately.
Yeah.
But in on the earth realm, we
Yeah.
are called, the law calls it fiduciaries, but
Yes.
the Lord really uses the same concept in stewardship. So we
Yeah.
really want to come alongside leaders to help them
Yeah.
know how to steward. So we talked about leadership in a rapidly changing world, like supporting leaders. And so
Yeah.
we had a large organization, ECFA, that spoke
Mhm.
on that topic. And
Mm.
then we had someone who did a great job talking about how to do well while doing good, how leaders
Mm.
and their ministries can thrive in a rapidly changing world,
Oh
right?
my
So a lot of
goodness.
times we see leaders experience burnout, and that has its own reality. So we have burnout, we have walkout, we have give out, like
Yeah.
those realities. And this speaker will, Dr. Palmer, talked about not only like how we can preserve leaders, but
Yeah.
also how the good work that the church is already doing can
Mm.
be funded. It can
Yeah.
be funded by grants and these other things, but we've got to make sure we are well positioned to
Mm.
receive these things. So
Yeah.
I was just so excited. Then we had an amazing fireside chat,
Yeah.
which is the way that we sort of pull together thought leaders in other areas. And we talked about areas like succession planning,
Yeah.
growing youth engagement. We had a
Mm.
former IRS agent
Yeah.
who gave her top tips about how to stay out of the IRS's radar, to
Well,
like,
can we park it there for a
we can
second? Because
park it
I think
there.
that people always say like, "Oh, the church is nonprofit. The IRS will never look at you." Like you
Mm.
know, when do ministries trigger eyes on them? Like what kind of situations can trigger the IRS to now get into your stuff?
So, first of all, the IRS has specific audit requirements
Yeah.
dedicated to churches.
Yep.
So that eliminates that misnomer that the IRS doesn't audit
Mhm.
churches. They have
Mhm.
a whole section dedicated to how and when they will audit a church.
Yep.
And you know what the big thing is? The
Mm.
IRS, as I always say, the IRS has a TV, they
Yeah.
got internet, they're on social media.
Yep.
So a lot of times churches put themselves on the IRS's radar because they don't know that what they're doing is a triggering, what I call a triggering event.
Yes.
Yeah, so the
What are
IRS,
examples of a triggering event? Can you think of one off?
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for sure. So sometimes the churches, they think that they're being fancy, really, and sort of like doing these big things. Like they'll
Yeah.
show, we raised $1 million, or we gave our leader $1 million in
Yeah.
cash, or we did. But the IRS is like, you did?
How did you yeah.
Yeah, tell us more, right? So a lot of these events that
Mm,
we bring attention to, because
mm,
we, in our kind of faith world, they can seem
yeah,
like they're neat and exciting, but for the IRS, those large financial moves, like they require a lot of proper management on the back end. And
mm,
so that can often trigger something. They say, and literally in their guidelines, they're like,
yeah,
we can look at social media, we can look at newsletters, we can look at your website. Like,
yeah.
so a lot of times it's our own behavior that invites the IRS in.
Oh my gosh, amazing. So there is a lot to learn for leaders to
Yeah.
preserve the legacy of what they're building.
And that's the whole point. We want to make sure that, I think the phrase is something like that, we reflect who God is well. Like,
Yeah.
we know that no human is perfect, no organization is perfect, but our heart is to really come aside the great people that
Yeah.
do wonderful work like you and other church leaders to
Mhm.
help undergird and to help support so that the good work that they do can be elevated and can go for the long haul and
Yeah.
not, unfortunately, experience any unintended
Yeah.
consequence.
Yeah, I was just talking to my team this morning. We just had our executive team meeting, and I was saying a lot of people, when they think about pastoring, right, they think
Mm,
about preaching and, if they can gather people and the preach, but people don't really think about operations, and
yeah.
they don't think about leadership. They don't think about structure and systems and
Hmm.
procedures, which actually, there's this concept in Christendom that we talk about function and flow. So a lot of times, especially in the charismatic circles, we love the flow of the Holy Spirit, the power of God. And we kind of stay away from the function. Like the Holy
Mm,
Spirit flows within a container. And I think that having things in place around your board, around PR, and maybe we could talk about that a
yes.
little bit, right? We've had a lot of
Yes.
exposure with leaders and how having someone in your corner, or even at least an understanding of law, can even help with PR. What are some of your thoughts around that? Just maybe churches that you've seen that have handled it
Mhm.
well, or just ideas with all this exposure that's going on with leaders.
So I think there are two big things that come to mind when you say that. First of all, I think that churches, like, I think about the way that I grew up, right? I grew up in this wonderful family church, and people knew each other. They loved each other. They really, reached out to each other. We couldn't imagine, honestly, the kind of world that we live in now where, I mean, when we grew up, nobody would think about suing a church,
Yeah.
right? But that's just not the reality anymore. So when you talk about protecting your brand, like, I certainly know about that as the church attorney, right? You see
Yeah.
that registered mark there, like, we make sure that IP is secure, right?
Yeah.
Your intellectual property, but it's your name. And
Yeah.
really, the Bible kind of talks about it the same way, that a
Yeah.
good name is rather
Mhm.
to be desired,
Yeah.
right, than
Silver
riches.
and
So
gold.
what you
Yeah.
have is your name, and that really is kind of like the branding concept. So I'll give you an example. I was working, I was called by another attorney, and this happens often, attorney, to come into a situation where a
Yeah.
church had decided that, so the leader had passed away. The board didn't think that the son would be the right successor, but
Yeah.
he had other thoughts. But the board fired him, and it became this huge media event,
Yeah.
right? So this is a large church. We're
Yeah.
talking tens of thousands of members,
Yep.
and it got all in the press. So when this happens, as we know, the word spreads like
Yeah.
wildfire. And if you don't already have something in place, it's hard to manage the media on
Yeah.
the fly. So I've seen situations where they're just on your property talking to
Mm.
whoever they want to talk
Yep.
to.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that becomes the soundbite. And
Yeah.
so thank God they brought me in, and I managed the media, right? All inquiries are directed to
Yeah.
me. We drafted a response, like, we managed it over time. And so we were able to calm things. But it's really one of those things. We had an expert on in the conference yesterday who is an attorney and a media expert, was a member of the press. So you really kind of have
Mhm.
to have people with a certain level of knowledge, because
Yeah.
once the media gets something, I always say that they don't let the facts get in the way of a good story.
Yes, yes, they
Doesn't
just
matter what
wanna
the
get
actual
it out
facts are.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I think this is something that a lot of churches don't think about. And what would you say to maybe a small ministry, a small church that's saying, we're small right now. What are some basic things that, even if you're smaller, you should be thinking about and you should be doing to make sure that you're putting yourself on a good path?
So I definitely honor and recognize that not every church is thousands of members, right? Not
Mhm,
every church has large resources, even if they're a
mhm.
smaller church, right?
Yeah,
So, because that is the majority of churches in the United States. I don't know
yeah,
if people recognize that less than 100 is the majority of churches in the US.
Mm-hmm.
So this sort of mega concept is often out front, but that's not the reality for most churches. So if it's okay that I mention, I
Yeah.
actually, because I work with churches so much and I see that there are churches who have a budget,
Yeah.
and we encourage that because a part of it
Yeah.
is just planning. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
everything else when it comes to budgeting. So making sure that we prioritize what's
Yeah.
actually important. But we created something that's specifically for churches to say,
Yeah.
listen, we can commit to X amount, because I
Mhm.
know that as an attorney who's been in
Yep.
this practice for over 20 years, that sometimes, as people say, the meter keeps running, right?
Yep.
You're paying per hour and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't keep up with the meter. But
Yep.
sometimes you just need a definitive amount that
Yep.
is a controlled amount that you can pay monthly,
Yep.
or you can pay all in one lump sum and know that you have access to information
Yes.
for a period of time. And so we
Yeah.
created that you can have access to an information
Yeah.
for a year. It's a membership where you
Yes.
can come in, and it's really the ideal opportunity, because
Yeah.
not every church, we also work on major retainers, right?
Yeah.
So there are
Yeah.
churches who say, Erika, we want to
Yeah.
have you on retainer for, you know,
Yeah.
many thousands of dollars,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's appropriate, they get their money's worth
Yeah.
also, but
Yeah.
not everybody's in that position. So Faithful Foundations
Yeah.
is a resource that is specifically for churches to be
Yeah.
able to and have the insight that they need, that's critical, and
Yes.
also to be able to manage the cost. There's not a church that can't reach
Yeah.
$59 a month.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest, this amount is not going to be available after
Mm-hmm.
we get the founding members in. So we
Yeah.
just launched this less than
Mhm.
24 hours ago. So your listeners will be able to have the benefit of
Yeah.
this founding amount, and or they can come in at $149 a month,
Mhm.
and that will give them the opportunity to actually come and bring their questions and a monthly
Yes.
Q&A. And
Yeah.
again, this is not something that we can provide, because if you think about like an hourly rates, like the firm that I was with,
Oh
they
yeah.
valued my time at $715 an hour.
Yep. An hour. Yep.
And that's
Yep.
just not a reachable number. I mean, I had a thriving practice. I did it for
Yeah.
22 years. So
Yeah.
obviously, there's enough churches that were able to
Yeah.
sustain that. But I'm just saying, I recognize that in this day and age, in this time, there are alternatives that are
Yeah.
needful.
And I love this because, Erika is not only a sister, but she is a student. She was one of my mastermind students, and we helped develop this Faithful Foundations
Yes,
membership because
yes.
Homegirl brings out all of the stuff that she offers. I mean, it is insane. I even had all my executive team like, y'all sign up for this event because we don't know half of this stuff. And I was like, we got to figure out a way to put this in a membership so that everybody can access it in an affordable way, in a streamlined way. And so if you are a church, if you're going to start a church and you're like, I don't know, just throw out some of the topics. I know we broke it
Oh,
down in
yeah.
modules. What are some of the
I'm so
modules that,
excited.
yeah.
So first of all, when they first start off, they will be able to get into, if they sign up now, they get access, because again, these are our founding members. So as soon as they get in the modules, they're going to see a welcome video from me, and then they're going to be able to walk through the information that's available there. They're going to also get access to this conference that you and I just talked about that
They get the
occurred
replay.
yesterday.
Yeah.
So it's already in there. They'll get the replay, and they'll get a valuable conference companion guide. The guide alone is worth more than they'll pay for the conference itself, and more than they'll pay for the Faithful Foundations,
Yeah.
because you will get inside of it some usage agreements, the internet usage agreement. Every church ideally offers the internet, right? And so, but you need to make sure that you have these policies in place. So we're going to help you make sure that you get these necessary policies.
Yeah.
We're going to work along with you. There's a top 4 that you want to make sure you have. And so by the time you go through this year with us, you'll have the necessary policies. You'll also have the necessary insights as things come up, right? Because the laws change, right?
Yeah.
There's new reporting requirement laws that happen in January of this year. So you're going to be able to get updates as the law moves along as well. You're also going to get a necessary document checklist so that you can literally take this back to your church and your leadership and go, do we have this? Do we have that? And you'll be able to see what you have and maybe what you need to get along the way.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing. There's so much that you guys would be able to have access to in that membership. And I value the work that you do so much that I was like, we have to have a conversation around this. So I know I asked you a couple questions. I don't know if you have any for me. And then we can take some questions also online. For those who are just jumping on, I'm talking to Erika Cole. She is the church attorney, has been working with churches and ministries for a really long time, but she focuses on really helping us get our stuff together
Yes.
legally, and from PR to finances to succession planning. All of those things are so important, that I wanted to have her on. And we're celebrating the launch of their membership called Faithful Foundations for churches and organizations to who can't afford a retainer of a lawyer for $715 an hour, right? To be able to pay $15 a month or $149 a month and get the pertinent information that they
Yes.
need. So,
Yeah, so thank you so much for really sort of, we have been working on this for a year or so, and that we really got into the weeds starting in January to build this
mhm,
out. So I've noticed that you and your church have a commitment to
mhm.
training your leaders. Like, how do you communicate the message to other church leaders about how to value the leadership that they have in their church and how to value the necessary training and information?
Yeah, I think that's so good because you talked about succession planning. Succession planning doesn't just happen when you decide that I'm tired or it's time for me to move on into a different, area. Succession planning starts from the beginning. And I think leadership development is part of that succession planning because when you leave a church, you don't just leave one person in charge, you're leaving an ecosystem of people, right? You have
Mm,
other pastors and people that are in place that if you did the work of early on resourcing them, sourcing them with something like this, I think we're joining the Faithful Foundation's, membership. They are able to have all the resources even when you're not around, right? And so you're building a really good foundation. So I would just encourage leaders. Like I missed the conference yesterday. Hopefully we get the replay with the 149 or whatever so that I can still watch it when I have some time. And so if you are a wise leader, you're thinking not just about the one person you're going to leave behind, but you're thinking about the legacy, no pun intended. That's the name of our church, but you're thinking about the whole ecosystem of people that you want to develop and train and resource as you're going forward. So that's important
that's
to
good.
us.
That's really good. I love how you put that. And maybe similarly along the lines, like, are there situations where
Yeah.
you've seen leadership and you're like, gosh, I wish they had, or maybe that you've been even called upon where someone says, we really need some help and we need some direction. Like, are there some situations like that you've experienced?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think a couple of years ago we just did a simple march, and that march blew up and ended up everywhere, TMZ and the whole nine, right? And so quickly we have to put our PR team together. Luckily, we had people in our church that were trained in PR and all of those things. But these are some of the things that you talk about in Faithful Foundations, like as you progress and as you grow, like what is the marketing plan? Today we were talking about Pioneers, our upcoming conference, and something came up, and Pastor Tim, who was in the training yesterday, he's like, I don't know how that's going to look optically. We learned about this yesterday in the, in the seminar. We need to make sure that it doesn't end up spinning in a crazy way, right? And so I think it's good. Even with that, we learn, where to trust the Holy Spirit, but we also have an awareness of where things, can go wrong. So that was an instant where we were like, okay, we're glad we have the people in the church, but if we had had the information before, would have already had those systems in place. And I've had to walk churches through pastors leaving. I've had to walk churches through pastors having moral failures, right? And even just talking to them from a legal perspective. You can't go into a meeting and tell your leaders, you can't tell anybody what happened in this church, right? Like there is some fallout that can come from there because you're muzzling them. You did something wrong and you're not giving them the space. So I think churches just understanding the legality around even simple things like that go a long way.
No, that's really good. And I think it's interesting too. Is it your experience that churches kind of respond more to legal things in a reactionary way, or do you think there's an appetite to sort of be prepared? I think some people kind of call it the vitamin versus the medicine, right? Vitamins are what we sort of take preventatively, but sometimes, people are less likely to do that, and maybe they go toward the medicine. Like, do you feel like the church community is one way or the other in your experience?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'll even say our church, we're getting to that point where we're being more proactive, right?
Hmm.
And of course, we've had lawyers for buildings and things like that. But I think sometimes you're just so focused on growing people and, developing people that you don't realize until there's a problem. And I
Yeah.
think that it's so important that for believers in general, that we live life proactively. And the service that you're offering, Erica says she's a church administrator and she's so excited to hear about it. But I think it will give churches the opportunity to be proactive. And I love you said there's a checklist that's one of the things that they get. What are some
Yeah.
things that are on that checklist that sometimes churches don't think about?
So, this is a document checklist. So, this is something that we encourage all churches to have really your documents in a row. Because before we can even talk about like the quality of whatever it is or whatever you might need to revise, we want to just see, do you have everything that the law would anticipate? So, we would start with your articles of incorporation, or some
Mhm.
states call it a certificate of incorporation. You just want to grab that, have that in handy. The second thing is your bylaws. Some churches
Mhm.
call it a constitution and bylaws, but you want to have that document handy. And I always say that 1972 was a great year, but it shouldn't be the last year that you've reviewed and updated your bylaws, right? So, but you want to grab that and make sure that that's handy. And then if you apply for tax exempt status, people
Mhm.
may often don't realize, but the law requires that you have a copy of your application. That's a form 1023. You have to have a copy of that available.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that you have that in place. And then ultimately, you would get that letter of determination from the IRS. And that's the letter that says, yes, you are tax exempt. So we
Mhm.
recommend that you have that. The next is a conflict of interest policy. And
Mhm.
again, the IRS anticipates that every organization has a conflict of interest policy. And what that covers is possible financial conflicts. This is, you asked earlier about like when the IRS can sometimes get
Yeah.
involved in church matters. Finances is a quintessential area. So you want to make sure that you have that. And we really want to help people make sure that they have all the ducks in a row and policies like that in place.
I'm telling you, I saw something the other day and I'm like, oh, they're going to flag themselves. They were saying they're selling their personal house so that they can invest all of the money into the church, and they're mixing all of their, and I think once again, people are spiritual and they don't think about the implications of what it looks like to, put the whole church in your name or take the personal money. That all those are the little details that I've seen in the kingdom that I'm like, I wish somebody was out there to give a little language.
Yeah, and what we may see as like, oh, we may think it's just a random good idea could literally be violation, right?
Yeah.
So I have seen situations where pastors have the church in their name, and sometimes it happens because
Mm-hmm.
they are founders.
Yeah.
At the time, the church doesn't have any money. They have to make sure that they're getting the loans. So
Yeah.
it all goes in their name. But we also don't recognize the fact that now you no longer have a tax exempt entity.
Yeah.
You can't, you're going to now have to pay for the taxes on this thing, which would be different than if it were in the name of the church. And there are all these other triggers that are created by these decisions. So you're absolutely right that sometimes leaders think about the spiritual part and we honor them for that.
Yeah.
I often say that's why I exist,
Yeah.
because I want you to be able to focus on your kingdom purpose. That's
Hmm.
why we are here. I'm walking in my purpose in serving churches in this way.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And I've absolutely loved chatting with you guys. For those who are just jumping on, We've been talking with Erika Cole. She is the church attorney, and we've just partnered with her in launching the membership called Faithful Foundations, where it resources churches with all of the things that they need, especially from the onset, to be, have a legal understanding of how to grow the church and grow the people. We're going to be rounding up. If there's any questions, you can drop them in here with the hashtag Q. I don't know if there's any final thoughts, Erika, you'd like to share.
Yeah. Can I mention just a couple of things? So
Yeah,
first of all, we are really excited to work with sort of the total ecosystem of the church, right? Some people might come in. We work with churches that are brand new, that might be church plants, but also churches that have existed for 10, 12,
yeah,
20, 100 years, right? We had an organization sign up yesterday. They are part of a large denomination.
yeah.
They've been around for 75 years. We had folks signed up yesterday, a couple of churches that are younger churches
Yes,
and everything in between. So it really is something for everyone. And I also want to just mention this part that can get organizations tripped up. I got an email about this from a pastor, was like, help.
yeah,
And that is that when a part of the expansion of the vision,
yeah,
we love visionaries, right? Because that's what leaders are, and they have these ideas and they're ready to run with it. And we want to be alongside them, helping to make sure things are organized. So
yeah,
this pastor says, "Can you please help me, because I'm saying that we are creating this additional CDC, and they want to make sure that they understand how to do it in the proper way. Sometimes people don't understand what I call a legal firewall." Right.
yeah,
So you might have the church, and maybe your church also has a daycare, which is
yeah,
great. Maybe your church also has like assisted living, which I have churches that do. You may have a 55 and older, like all these different things. And I am here for it.
yeah.
But if you put it all under one EIN, God help you,
Mhm.
right? If
Yeah,
you don't create these separate legal firewalls, and also how do they relate to one another? If sometimes churches that have a school, they want to make sure that the school, can pour into the church, and all of these things. There's a way to do it, but we want to make sure that we do it in the proper way so that we don't trigger any unnecessary scrutiny.
I love that. Nicole says, will we have the replay? I'm a new pastor, 4 years in Florida. So I assume she means the
Ah,
replay from yesterday. So yesterday they had their conference, and when you sign up for the Faithful Foundations, you said at the 149 price,
yeah,
they get the
yes.
replay.
So not only do you get the replay from yesterday's events, but you also get the conference for 2023 and 2022. So you get the past three events when you sign up. So yes, and we. Mhm.
App. So the link is there below that we are sharing, and this replay is going to be up. So if you meant this, we're going to leave this up. How long do people have to register?
So if you want to get all of the exciting bonuses that we just talked about, that's until today at 11:59. So you've got plenty of time to get in today. We are going to close registration on September 25th at midnight. So if you need to chat with anybody about that, then certainly do so. But September 25th, and we kick off on October 1st. So we're also going to have an orientation for everyone who's signed up, so you know how to get the best use of this product. And we're really excited for you.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on
Thank
and
you for having
having
me.
you welcome having this chat. And we're just so excited about Faithful Foundation. So make sure to follow her. You can use this link to register, but just to learn all of the different services they have as well.
Yeah, and I just want to say I'm so excited to have been a part of the 21 days fasting and prayer as well, this day 18.
Yes.
And it's just been such a huge blessing. Thank you for your faithfulness on being on the wall and just keeping everything just so excellent. And I appreciate your support.
Yay. Bless you guys. Thanks for being on. I don't see any other questions here, but I pray that this was informative. You can watch the replay, go to the website, check out the information, and I look forward to chatting with you guys next week. Bye
Bye.
bye.